Hello everyone and welcome back to Decks and Dials. Today I wanted to talk about this Divemaster 4 automatic chronograph from Aragon that I got at the beginning of December at the Black Friday sale that Aragon ran, and you can still get it at that same price today. So I'm filming this on January 29th. If you go to the website of Aragon, you'll see that this watch is listed at about $1,200, I believe, US dollars, and then is already discounted to $900. And the code that I used to get it down to $450 is still active as of the end of January. So it might be deactivated later, but the owner of Aragon has extended that original Black Friday offering up till now. So I highly recommend you get it if you like what I tell you about this watch, because I think that this might be the best value automatic chronograph that you can get right now, because the movement in here, the NE88, is incredibly good value for the money. This is a Seiko high-end automatic chronograph movement. It's not really the best movement that Seiko has, because it's not one of their spring drive movements, of course, but from their regular movements, this is really, really great. If you are in the market for an automatic chronograph that isn't, from one of the high-end luxury brands like Rolex, this might be, the best bang for your buck that you can get. So the code that you want to use is, once again, DM88, if I haven't mentioned it before. So here it is now. I believe it's still active right now. So if you miss out, I'm very sorry to hear that. But yeah, with this code, I believe this is a damn great value. So let's start off by talking about the dimensions. This might be the point where a lot of people might check right out. So this is the smaller of the two versions that Aragon offers, and it's 45 millimeters wide. Now, there's an even bigger one that's 50 millimeters wide, and I know for a lot of people that's just a deal breaker. And to be honest, I was a little bit hesitant as well, because typically I like to wear watches that are around, let's say, between 40 and 42 millimeters. But because it has these stubby little lugs, it has actually a relatively short lug-to-lug width of 51 millimeters, which again isn't small, but it isn't ludicrously huge either. And for something that's where the case is 45 millimeters in diameter, that lug-to-lug is actually quite reasonable. It's about the same as my Orient Trident, and that's a 42 millimeter watch, I believe. So another one of the questionable aspects of this watch is the thickness. So as you can see, it is a big boy. So I believe it's 19 millimeters thick. Yep, let me look over. It is indeed. That's really thick. This is definitely one of the big minuses of the watch. And as I said, I want to get the dimensions out front, because, yeah, if this watch, if those dimensions sound like they might be too much for you, then, the rest of the review might be irrelevant. But if you're like me and you're willing to give a slightly larger watch a try, as I said, it's not as big as it seems from just the sheer diameter, because, as I said, those compact lugs actually make it wear quite reasonably on the wrist. So I'll show that off at the end of the video. So for now, I just want to go over the pluses and minuses of this watch, what I like about it, what I dislike about it. And yeah, so, oh, and one last thing about the dimensions, the lugs are 22 millimeters. And that's pretty common, I believe, for larger watches. So you should be able to find straps without too much trouble. So let's start off by talking about the star of the show, which is the NE88 Seiko movement. So it's a 28,000 beats per hour movement. So it's a very smoothly ticking seconds hand. It has a 45-hour power reserve, and it is a column wheel chronograph with a vertical clutch. Now, I'm not an expert on the mechanisms of automatic chronographs, so from my understanding, the column wheel mechanisms makes for a smoother actuation of the chronograph pushers, and the vertical clutch gives a more kind of precise start, stop, and reset for the chronograph hands. So again, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to have tried many different variants, but this is at least my understanding from doing some reading about it. So moving on from the movement itself, which, by the way, you can see through this very nice display case back. Let me get that up close to the camera so you can see. Not too much that you can see through the rotor, but the rotor itself is very nicely, not embossed, but the writing of the technical details, like the fact that it's a Japanese-made movement, as you can see, NE88A, 24 joules. That's all done in gold on a silver background, so I think it looks pretty good. And you can see the balance there, the adjustment lever. Yeah, so not too much that you can see, but as you can see, from a utilitarian standpoint, I mean, they did what they could. You have a little bit of decoration on the rotor, and that's good enough for me because I don't see this as a watch that's all about beauty. So this is more about getting a really cool movement for a very affordable price. So moving on from the movement itself, let's talk about everything else. So the bezel is loomed, and I believe it's a sapphire. No, actually, no, it doesn't feel like sapphire. The bezel appears to be ceramic. Yeah, I don't think that's sapphire. I think the bezel is ceramic, and the crystal on top is sapphire. I'm not sure whether the crystal on the bottom is sapphire or not, but really it's the top crystal that really makes a difference because, as I said, it's a thick watch, and I've already banged it up against the door handle several times in the couple of weeks that I've had it. So yeah, it's definitely a good thing that you have got a sapphire crystal on top to make sure that you don't scratch up the watch in everyday use, because yeah, with such a thick case, at least I'm not used to something like that on my wrist, so I banged it up against things a lot. So the bezel is loomed, as are the all the pips, or rather the indices and the background of the dial itself. So I'll put up a picture here of what the watch looks like in the dark, and of course all the hands are loomed as well. And I picked this particular colorway, so there are a couple of others. I think there's blue, there's brown and black, and I picked the white because I don't really have a white-faced watch. So I picked it up because thinking that, you know, it might be good to have a little bit of variety in my collection, which are for the most part blue and black watches. And that might have been somewhat of a mistake because when you're thinking of it from just the standpoint of the loom, in the dark, the fact that the dial itself is loomed makes it kind of a little bit harder to see the loom on the indices. So it kind of blends, the indices blend in with the dial itself. It makes it a little bit harder to read in the dark, which kind of, you know, goes against the whole point of having loom. So I think that might have been just a wrong choice of dial color for me. Another thing is that the white color of the bezel makes it a little bit difficult to make out the numerals on the bezel at a glance. So if you take a moment to kind of focus on it, you can obviously see all the numbers on the bezel, but at a glance it is less readable than, for example, some of the other colorways where, for example, if it's a, you know, this lime green on black or something like that, or white on black. So a little bit lacking in contrast for me, but I can live with it. So moving on, let's talk about the water resistance. So this is a serious dive watch. As you can see, we've got 200 meters of water resistance, and the crown screws down, and the pushers for the chronograph screw down as well. So they obviously don't screw on top of it like the main crown, but rather they prevent you from pushing on the pushers until you unscrew those little collars, and that prevents essentially the pushers from traveling in and out, and the gaskets inside from being in motion when you might be under the water, which would reduce their water resistance. I've got a nice big screw down case back that obviously also contributes to the water resistance, and I believe that if they didn't want this water resistance, they could have made this a little bit thinner, but they did, and it's nice to have. Another detail about the bezel that I really like is the amount of grip that you have. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the coinage bezels, so this is a huge upgrade over that. This thing has grip for days. It doesn't matter if your hands are wet or dry. If you're wearing gloves, you can grip this thing under any conditions and turn it very easily. It has a nice amount of resistance, and it locks up like a bank vault. Like, there is zero backplay at all. It is an extremely solid bezel in terms of its action, and I really like it. It lines up nicely with the 12 o'clock index as well. So moving on, want to talk about the bracelet. It is a true 3-link bracelet. Now, a couple of my other watches are imitating a 3-link bracelet, so these 3 pieces would actually be 1 piece of metal. Here, they're actually 3 individual pieces of metal, which increases the articulation. I find the bracelet to be quite comfortable. Now, it is heavy because they are quite wide and there's really no taper at all. But given how heavy the head of the watch is, the heaviness of the bracelet actually gives it a very secure feeling when it's on your wrist, and it doesn't dangle around or anything like that. So it sits quite comfortably on the wrist despite the weight, and perhaps even because of it. The clasp itself, as you can see, is a milled clasp, very, very solid. You've got the fold over, and the release of the clasp is operated by these 2 pushers, so it's not just a friction clasp. I like that. It's very secure. You do have a couple of micro adjusts, as you can see here. I would have liked to have seen more, but you know, it's acceptable to have at least a few. The finishing is all brushed pretty much everywhere. There's really no polished parts at all, which I'm totally okay with. I don't like polished parts because they scratch up very easily. So those are pretty much all the pluses about this watch. And oh, I almost forgot. A small detail, but one that I pay a lot of attention to when I buy a new watch. The pins in the bracelet are split pins, which are really much, much better than the pin and collar system that other companies like Seiko, for example, use, because when you have the pin and the collar, that's just an extra part, an extra tiny part that you can lose very easily when you're taking apart the bracelet to size it. Now, having just the one part, which is the pin itself, when you're taking it out, makes things a little bit easier on you and a lot less aggravation, because you don't have that extra tiny collar that you can lose quite easily. So with that in mind, let's move on to the negatives. So there are a few things that do annoy me about this watch. I've already mentioned a couple of them. As I said, I don't like the loomed bezel as much as I thought I would. Now, I admit the watch is very good looking, and the loomed dial and the bezel color in white are quite nice, but not very practical. As I said, you do lose a bit of readability on the bezel because of that, and at night the glow from the bezel from the dial actually interferes with being able to read the indices. Another thing that I'm not a big fan of are these hands. I believe this selection of colors is just, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. So for example, you have the 3 subtiles. You have the one over here that's just the running seconds, that is the same color as the other 2, which are to do with the chronograph, as is the chronograph seconds hand. So you have all of those 4 hands in red, and then you have another 2 colors, which is blue for the hours and orange for the minutes. I don't know why this is. I think you could have stuck to 1, maybe 2 colors. As it is, you have all these colors in here for no apparent reason, without any kind of logic, and I find it a little bit irritating. And the date is actually a white, or rather a black date wheel, which doesn't really fit the look of the rest of the watch. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that on the larger version of this watch, you have another 2 indices at the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. On the smaller one at 45 millimeters, those 2 are gone, I guess, because there's just no room to put them there. So those are the main things that really irritate me about the watch in terms of little downsides. But I think that when you take all of this into consideration as a whole, I think it's still a really great watch if you can get it at that price of $450. Now, at the full $900, I'm not really sure anymore, because there are a lot of automatic chronographs that you can get for $900. Some of them with similar movements, some of them with maybe slightly lower grade movements, but that might have other advantages. But at $450, it's just unbeatable, because you have a dive watch essentially with an automatic chronograph movement that's, you know, a relatively high-end one, right? And the amount of value that you get is really incredible. So let me show you how the chronograph runs. Let me undo the pusher collars. It does feel quite precise when you start it. Very nice operation, very smooth. And yeah, I really love it, and I can definitely live with the downsides. The only things that I might change in the future are that I might change the hands, actually, because that contrast in colors look good on the photos on the website, but in real life it does irritate me, and we'll see if over a longer period of time I'll learn to live with it. But yeah, at the moment I still haven't gotten used to having this many colors that don't seem to have any kind of pattern to them, or rather any kind of design aesthetic behind them. It just seems like they just grab different color hands. But yeah, I am still quite happy with the purchase, and I would recommend that you get this watch if you can get it at that $450 price, because that's a steal. At $900 or at the the full MSRP price, that's over $1,000. You might have to think harder about that, but at this promotional price, it's a no-brainer. I highly recommend you get it. So if you like this review, please give me a like and subscribe if you want to see more. Hit the notification button so you don't miss future videos, and I'll see you soon.